Well, all of us, when we either see something or hear something, think we understand what it says. We come with our pre-understanding. We're designed that way. It's that's not a fallacy. That's we're designed that way. So, but the problem arises is what happens if we're actually wrong? How do we know?
Classical Conversations presents Refining Rhetoric with CEO Robert Bortons, a podcast where faith, business, politics, and classical education meet. Join us as we use the classical tools of rhetoric to seek truth in every arena of life.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Refining Rhetoric. Today my guest is Charles Dewberry. He's the academic dean and tutor at Gutenberg College. I'm on the board of Gutenberg College, and just a little bit background on him. He has a PhD in philosophy from the University of Oregon, so go Ducks. He has an MS Stream ecology degree from Michigan State University. I had one of my uncles went there, and a BS in arts from Michigan State University as well. And now he's doing great work with the students over at Gutenberg College. They just recently had a lot of beautiful renovations done to their space, welcoming the students back for this academic year. So, Charley, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. Glad to be here.
Now, can you tell us a little bit about Gutenberg College and what are some of those key ideas that are the foundation of what you guys do and how it's different from maybe the rest of the majority of the collegiate landscape?
Well, Gutenberg College takes a great books approach to education. Our primary goal is for our students to learn to live wisely. And we view that as a skill. It's an art, which is, made up of skills. And so information is important, but the primary goal is to teach those skills of living well, translate the information into the skills of living well. That's the fundamental difference, I would say, between Gutenberg and other colleges, both what the goal is and how we go about attaining it.
Yeah, I think you can probably look at a lot of the Latin on some of those Ivy League colleges, and maybe they came from that background, but I don't think many of their tutors or professors would say that they have a goal of creating students that are going to live wisely. And
Right.
and you guys do that by doing it a different method called tutoring and having the students kind of all take that same track, right?
Yes, so we only have one major, and when a class comes in, we only accept a class of 20. So when a class comes in, they're going to be in every class together. There's no electives. So from beginning to end, it's one conversation with one group of students and one group of tutors.
Yeah, so talk about what does that process, what does the tutoring process look like compared to a lecture, and how does that correspond with the classical methodology that we really root for here at Classical Conversations?
Okay. Well, basically, as I already mentioned, the arts are based on skills. My first comment is you don't learn any skill by listening to a lecture. So even take something like riding a bicycle. There's all kinds of rules and things you have to learn, and you can be telling that student over and over and over again what all those rules are. The information's important, but that's not how they learn to ride a bike. They learn to ride a bike by doing it, by working on the skill of riding a bike. And so at Gutenberg, they work on those skills that are necessary for communication and listening, reading, discursing, criticizing. All of those are skills that we focus on the entire 4 years of the program.
Now, is there a lot of reading of original source documents in the Gutenberg College curriculum? Can you tell us about that?
Sure.
How are they engaging with these great books?
The majority of all the classes are excerpts initially in the first 2 years of great books. So they're reading primary sources virtually all the time. The last 2 years, the major class is called The Great Conversation. And here, the students go back and read virtually all of major works that they read during the last 2 years. So, in our view, the first 2 years are working on those skills of being able to enter the great conversation. And just to comment that CC students come prepared as well as any other group to jump in and do this kind of program. And it is an intensive program. I mean, the languages and the discussions and the writing of theses. Yeah, CC students are as prepared as any to do this process.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about science and the great books. One of Gutenberg Press's first releases, a book you've read, Saving Science, a critique of science and its role in the salmon recovery. You've written Intelligent Discourse, Exposing the Fallacious Standoff Between Evolution and Intelligent Design in 2006. So how does the great books relate to science? Because everyone now seems to still be talking about STEM, and people would not associate what you just told them about with engaging in science. So how do those things relate?
Well, I think the easiest way to tell that is actually to tell my story of what happened to me. From the time I was 5 years old, I wanted to study fish, be a scientist, and work on restoring streams. Everything went great through my master's degree. And on the way out to Oregon, I don't know how, but I picked up a philosophy book. And I started to read it. First thing I realized, I couldn't read it. Secondly, I realized that book had destroyed everything I'd ever been taught about science and how to do it. And that book, for instance, used the Copernicans as their paradigm case of, well, everybody agrees they founded modern science, but what was that modern science? And so my answer is anyone who wants to be a scientist at some point has to ask the question, what is science and how do you do it? I didn't realize that until I was on my way to start my PhD. And those questions are philosophical questions, not science questions. And so if you want to understand what science is and what its role and limits are, you have to study philosophy, not science. So that was my first lesson. So in the end, where I came to is doing science is no different than any other liberal art. It's high art. And so for me, whether I'm doing science or interpreting the Bible or interpreting a great book, it's all exactly the same process. One's not greater or less than the other, at large. I mean, there can be reasons for why one might be a little better than the other at a particular point, maybe more information. But inherently, there's no difference between doing science and reading the skill of reading the Bible. They're both high arts.
So can you give us some examples of what are those philosophical questions that you started encountering and thinking through as you picked up and engaged with that philosophy book that made you realize those are two different, or those needed to be paired together?
Right. Well, the book was Personal Knowledge by Michael Polanyi, who's, interestingly enough, a theoretical chemist. And what he said was, our whole perspective that philosophy is testing hypotheses, setting up these experiments, these controlled experiments, running the experiments, doing the tests. And as a result of following that method, science comes up with more certain and more objective results than we get in anything else. Polanyi's perspective is everything I said there is false. None of it is defensible. So, as I said, how I know something in science and how I know something in history is no different. There is no scientific method. That was the lesson. And he starts with the Copernicans and said that's the science they founded. And the ironic thing is now, because scientists don't study philosophy or the classics, they don't realize that if they were in that point in time, they would actually agree with the Catholic Church against the Copernicans. So if you take their view today of what science is and how to do it, they're on the side of the Catholic Church against the Copernicans. So we spend a fair amount of time looking at science and how to do it at Gutenberg. And that's one of the classes. We spend a year of the students reading the Copernicans. So Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, Descartes, Newton. They actually read their original works, and they're reading them to answer the question, what is science and how do you do it? And as I say, it's pretty clear that their method is not our method. Their view of science is not our view of science.
You do it over a whole entire year. Can we sum it up? So, if am I understanding this right? So we had the Copernicums, these great scientists that we look to, and modern science has almost gone back and rejected how that they've done it, and you're helping students understand the worldview and the what they should be doing how they should be looking at science.
Right. So yes, the information side of what we do at Gutenberg is help the students build a coherent worldview that includes all of reality. So, I mean, in order to be skilled and know how to live, you need to understand what's real, what's true, what's right and good. You have to have that information, but that's only the first step. Then you have to apply it, and the application is learning those skills to do a skillful action, to do a right action, to actually live well. So it's both those elements that are key.
Have you heard, or do you have any stories you share with us, like students that you've seen living well through graduation, where maybe they made a decision that would be the opposite of what the world would encourage them to do, or just how do they view life after they graduate?
Well, one of the things I find most interesting is when I'm asked what most of the what Gutenberg graduates do. Roughly a quarter to a third of them decide they want to stay in Eugene, to stay in the community. Now, that to me is different from how most students, most graduates view their university. So that would be the fundamental difference from my perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they love that thinking and that thought process and the community around them. Do you have any students that come back and tell you about how this sort of education prepared them for what was next compared to what they're seeing with their peers, whether it's in business or their local church or whatever they're involved in?
Yeah, a number of students do. I think the most interesting trend at this point is we have one student who graduated and her interest was in telephone communication, and she had worked for a telephone company. Well, after Gutenberg, she went back to work for the phone company and went to go up through the phone company, and now she works internationally at an incredibly high level. And what is she doing? Well, whenever there's complex problems, you have to have an individual who's a generalist, who has incredibly good thinking skills, listening skills, who can listen to all these specialists, bring them all together, and solve a complex problem. She's now, as I say, traveling Europe constantly, trying to figure out the next generation of communication. I think that's a huge trend in the future, is who are those people with that skill set who can organize specialists, get them together, talk, solve complex problems. Our chairman of the board also has mentioned that in his IT parts of the business world, that's exactly the skill set that everybody's screaming for. Because who teaches that? Who teaches that kind of skill set? So to me, that's the trajectory that I find most interesting right now. That's happening.
Yeah, I've seen, it's from a few years ago now, but even Mark Cuban and some of these high thinking IT guys are saying we need more well trained, classically educated leaders in our companies to help us solve these big problems, to think through these philosophical and moral issues. If you think about the rise of AI, someone with
Mhm.
some sort of worldview is going to be programming those and writing the algorithms,
Mhm.
and we could see very different results based on the type of thinking and background we have there. And so I think those classically educated, not just through high school, which is going to give them a firm foundation to have those type of conversations and be problem solvers, but continuing that through a great books collegiate program is going to be, not something, people say, oh, that's just a liberal arts degree. Well, part of the reason
Mhm.
people say that is because of the quality of the liberal arts degrees at a lot of our public institutions. Those are a little bit different than what they're going to get at a great books institution like Gutenberg College. So,
Yeah.
yeah, talk about that. Like, what's the difference between like a liberal arts degree and a great books degree?
Well, in our case, we are a liberal arts great books college. So, liberal arts college, they just focus on the arts at some level and look at the information and the skills that are necessary to do that. And they do it by a multiplicity of ways, lectures, labs, all kinds of things. The Great Books College basically focuses on small group discussions of the primary works as the center of the curriculum, so that they're constantly working on these fundamental skills of reading somebody who holds a view different from them, get inside their head, understand them, really learn to listen well, and then to be able to analyze it, criticize it, judge it, and then be able to communicate with others about all aspects of that. Um, those are not skills that are being trained for in most high school or college settings.
No, absolutely not. So right now, you guys are in the middle of the semester. What books are you reading as a cohort, and what are some of those discussions that you're having right now?
Let's see. This week we're doing the ancients this quarter. We just finished Mesopotamia in the first couple weeks, so now they read some of Homer on Monday, and they'll be reading some Herodotus on Wednesday. So that's what the freshmen and sophomores are doing.
And then as they're reading Homer, what are you trying to draw out of them or have them draw out of themselves in those discussions?
Well, in part, first, what is this form? I mean, it's a myth. What are myths? What are they for? What's their purpose? Who's the audience? What kind of rules do we sort of need to keep in mind to interpret them? I mean, every genre has kind of their own rules. And so, first, paying attention to exactly what is this? How does it fit within their culture? How does it fit within the myths, for example, of Mesopotamia? How are they like and different from the myths in Mesopotamia? So, as I say, first thing is paying attention to the form and then paying attention to what was the author's intent when he wrote it. Um, that's fundamentally the skill we're aiming for in reading is what is this and what's the author trying to say?
And why should anyone read Homer anyways?
Well,
Like, what's the point of Homer?
I would say there's three or four reasons, and I'm not putting them in any particular order. If I thought about it, I would probably put them in a different order. But first, um, one of the skills of being educated is to be able to put yourself in somebody's head who's radically different from you. That's the skill of listening. So
Mm.
that's critically important. And that's an excellent way to do it. The second is it's written in Greek, and our students are taking Greek, although they're not reading it in Greek, but they'll often look up Greek references and maybe sentences at points. And that is also to pay attention to the structure of these languages. Greek or Latin is very structured. So it's important to pay attention to those clues. Third, in either listening or reading, a fundamental skill is recognizing when, well, all of us, when we either see something or hear something, think we understand what it says. We come with our pre-understanding. We're designed that way. That's not a fallacy. We're designed that way. So, but the problem arises is what happens if we're actually wrong? How do we know? And there's clues. In normal language, we would just say, well, all of a sudden I'm not tracking with this. Well, what's going on? I'm not tracking with it. Well, at that point, you should stop. That's a flag that the view you're bringing to what this is probably not right. And you need to stop there and back up and see what other options there are. That's probably the most fundamental skill to learn how to read or listen. Is you already know what you think it says, like Bible verses. You know what this piece of the Bible says, but you got to pay really close attention to what are the clues that are actually telling you that resist that pre-understanding. Anyway, that's a central aspect of it. And let's see, the last part I would say is it's our historical legacy. And I did the lecture on pre-Socratics this morning, and I basically said, I'm not aware of any major topic or question I can think of that they ultimately didn't ask. And so what we see over and over and over again are the same sorts of questions. And some of the answers are different. Some of the answers come dressed up a little differently, but there's a long history of the same basic questions being debated. And lastly, it really helps in understanding why we're where we're at. We're where we're at because we've been on where are we, 2000? We're on like a 5,000 or 6,000 year trajectory in history. And if you follow the conversations and debates through that period of history, you have a really good understanding of how we got here, why we're here, how to think about it, and essentially make critical decisions on what you should accept and not accept. Anyway, that's a few reasons I guess I would list for doing it. There's probably more, but those are the ones that come to me immediately.
Yeah, I think about that Temple of Apollo in Greece where it says, know thyself. And some of these things that you're talking about is helping us know ourselves and be able to, I want to live as close to truth as possible, because I think that's going to give us the best outcomes in life. And if we can't, have a frame of reference to identify what things are true, what aren't true, how do we get closer to truth and not willing to wrestle with those, then we're not going to have a very flourishing life on this side of heaven, at least.
Right. And the other aspect of that is what I would call the existential side is you have to make decisions and those decisions affect your character. They develop your character. So information's important, but if you want to live wisely, there's no getting around that existential aspect of making decisions. So Kierkegaard is one of the heroes at Gutenberg, obviously separate from the 20th century existentialists that were mostly all atheists. But Kierkegaard was an existentialist, and I think his understanding of the faith is as good as anybody I've read in the history of Christianity.
What's your favorite part, or what is something that he said that really stands out to you?
Well, that that knowledge is one thing, but you have to actually make a decision. You have to
Mm.
actually decide. And then you have to live your life um, living out that decision. That's fundamentally what our life is living out that faith.
Yep. Yes. Well, that reminds me of a funny anecdote. This is just a silly story, but you know, imagine you're going on vacation and you leave a list of tasks and things that you want someone to do. They're going to watch your house for a month because you're sailing away or something.
Mhm.
And you get back and the house is trashed. Nothing that you asked them to do was done. They didn't actually do anything. And you say, did you not read my list of things and my directions on what needed done? And they're like, oh yeah, we memorized it. And they stand up there and they can recite it from memory, but your house is still trashed.
Right.
And so much of our, I'll say, modern Christianity has been this idea of, uh, you know, oh, I know all the right things, I know the answers, but we're not living it out on a daily basis. So we're not living wisely. And then, yeah, we're surprised after 5,000 years that we find ourselves maybe where we were just a few thousand years ago again, repeating the same mistakes as previous empires and previous societies. And so, yeah, living wisely is so important.
Yeah, well, the Bible makes it really clear, especially in like Corinthians, that there's wisdom of the world and then there's the wisdom of God, and they're two very separate things.
Mm.
And the problem for all of us is, I mean, there's no there's no escaping. We have one step in the world. We have to live in the world. We have to navigate it, but we're to be in it, but not of it. And it seems to me that that's a very, very difficult question to sort out, and that's a lifelong journey of sorting that question out. And I think it's fundamental to what it means to be a human being and live a life of meaning is figuring out the answer to that question and what it looks like and actually trying to live it out.
Mm. Well, I'd suspect that about 100% of public school liberal arts programs don't even ask that question. It's probably the most fundamental question we can ask ourselves as Christians on a daily basis. So I wanted to get your opinion. You've been around for a while. Where do you see the future of classical education? It's more and more people are looking for classical education. We even have Governor DeSantis in Florida saying that we need classical education in our country. Uh, what do you see the future of classical education and moving forward?
Well, I mean, I think that what's happening is a lot of people are, one, coming to the conclusion that an education just aimed at job training is not really education. I mean, yes, we all have to get a job, but being a human being and living as a Christian in this world is a whole lot more than that. So for Christians, it seems to me that there will continue to be a move in that direction. On the secular side, I think that there's a lot of people realizing that there are some real problems in public education, and what is public education doing at this point? I mean, even job training is not going well. Reading skills, math skills. And so there's a whole history here of even going back to like the 60s and abandoning the idea that truth matters, that there's a whole truth out here, a worldview that matters. No, they decided that wasn't true. What we'll do is we'll deal with partial truths in specialties. So people will specialize. They'll get to know a lot about a little piece of this. The other part is the abandonment of any kind of moral education. And it just, I, all human beings at a point realize, or I think at some level they realize that to be a human being does have something to do with what goodness is. And we need to actually think about what that is and what it would look like. So, I mean, I think we see the impacts of those kind of things working their way out in culture. And there's a lot of people looking at culture right now going, there's something fundamentally wrong in the trajectory here of education and the outcome of that education. If that answers your question.
No,
So
absolutely.
I think that will only push more people towards looking at classical education as a way to get back to those fundamental truths that were always part of American education. I mean,
Mm.
if you look at the founding fathers, our education really comes as close as any, I think, or as close as any around now to what theirs was. I mean, they're probably the closest model we have to what Gutenberg is. There's a number of institutions now that are accepting that sort of basis and then trying to rebuild academics at high school and college level. So I mean, I mean, on one hand, that's an answer, but on the other hand, it's up to God if we're going to get a reformation or not. And if we do get a reformation, then our educational system would have to go back to truth and morality. So if that's going to happen, then this will become way more important in the whole culture. And if it doesn't, it still plays that same role for Christians because we're living for a different purpose. We're living to figure out what it means to live well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you want to get off that crazy train that is modern education, Classical Conversations is a great opportunity. If you haven't graduated high school and if you're looking for college opportunities, I definitely encourage you to check out Gutenberg College. So, Charley, thank you so much for sharing your insights today. What's the website? What are some events people might be able to attend to check it out, check out the college? Is there a way for them to come visit? And just give us all those details.
Sure. Gutenberg College website is Gutenberg College, so that'll be easy to find. And on the website, there's events. There's events like we have a preview days where high school students come and visit Gutenberg. We have one on Friday, this coming Friday. We have them every quarter. We also have educational conferences and winter institutes where we take on this time we're taking on a specific Christian issue of how do we live at a time where God has abandoned a culture. And we're basically reading a book from the 1950s by Jacques Ellul, which I think is going to be an interesting context for us. Let's see. Those are the major events happening. All of them are on the events section of the website. So you can find all the information there on the website at Gutenberg College.
All right. We'll put those links in the show notes for sure. Charley, thank you so much for taking time out of tutoring those young souls to come onto our podcast today. To our listeners, definitely encourage you to share this episode with a friend, learn a little bit more about what a liberal arts great book education can really be about. We want our kids to live wisely. Yeah, it's a good question to ask yourself. Is the college or opportunities that you're looking at for your kids, do they have that same vision for you, for them, that you do? So until next time, God bless.
Thank you for listening to Refining Rhetoric with Robert Bortons. Want more? Make sure to subscribe so you won't miss an episode. You can also follow us on social media to continue the conversation and visit classicalconversations.com/rhetoric to find out how you can join a local homeschool community.